structure of the Jummahs, the surahs, the tafsirs, all of those things align with that central theme. And so does this talk today. So Dr. Datay, we are very privileged to have, for me, one of my personal mentors and a great inspiration to all of us. I just want to say a few words about Dr. Datay, if he doesn't mind. Dr. Datay was a medical student here at UCT, and he actually won the Rhodes Scholarship after finishing medicine and went to Oxford. And he's an incredible man, and I look up to him in many ways. And he's basically going to be talking to us about the relationship between Islam and primary health care. And why that's important is because as Muslims especially, we often think that here on med school, we're here because we're wanting to follow the journey of becoming a health professional. But on the other hand, we know that we're also on a very much a spiritual journey, given the fact that we're Muslim, and that spiritual journey is to find Allah. So it's almost like there's two juxtaposing journeys that we have to face. The first to become a health professional, and the second to find and connect with Allah, which is the ultimate purpose. And because of how busy life tends to be on this campus, we often struggle to make time for Allah. We often struggle to dedicate time to remember and to become closer to Allah. And essentially what we want to do in this talk, one of the many things that we want to do in this talk, is to show you how you can actually connect your deen to your degree. How you can connect with Allah through your degree. And I think that's essentially the key message behind this talk. And to show you that Islam is embedded within it primary healthcare, and primary healthcare embedded within it is Islam. So I leave you with Dr. Ishaaq Datay to lead us in the talk. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah, brother. Yes, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I greet you with universal greeting of peace. Just to start off with a prayer, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I ask the full protection against the cursed shaitan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil mursalin, sayyidina wa nabiyyina maulana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. All praise is due to our Creator, and we send salutations upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. And I start off with a prayer of Moses, which he did before he went to the Pharaoh, where I asked the Creator to open my chest and to grant in me self-confidence, contentment, and boldness, and to ease my task for me, to loosen the knot in my tongue, so that my speech may be understood. So I want to thank the Muslim Student Association for inviting me to speak here. I want to say that it's a great honor and privilege to be here, and also that I don't feel worthy of being here at all. I think that there are many other people that are more worthy than me. There is also a responsibility that I've got, and Allah SWT has put in me a passion for something called primary healthcare, alhamdulillah. And my hope is that this passion can be ignited in all of you, inshallah. It's a passion that started with me as a student, alhamdulillah. And it's something that I think that can, if we can implement it, it can really make a difference in this world, inshallah. And one of my aims in life is to become redundant. Why do I say that? Well, there was this one of my kind of heroes, David Sackett. He's the father of evidence-based medicine, and this is something that he said. And the reason why I say that is that is kind of the ultimate level of success. If we can convey our message to the point that others have taken it, after that one becomes redundant, then that is the level of success. And if we look at the example of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there was this person that came to meet the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he was in the outskirts of the town when he came, and he saw this person, and he was exactly what was described in the scriptures, and he thought this was the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this person said, no, I'm not the Prophet, but I'm going to take you to him. And he met so many other people, and every time he thought it was the Prophet, but no, it wasn't. And at that time, Prophet ﷺ just passed away. So, it's, for us to, if we can become redundant, inshallah, then I think, inshallah, it would be a good thing to achieve. So, I've divided my talk into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to speak about what is Islam. The second part is what is primary healthcare, and what does primary healthcare have to do with Islam. And then the third part is going to be more conversation in terms of how do we move forward, we go from here. And once again, we just quickly put a disclaimer. I'm not a scholar of deen. There are scholars of deen, the audience. So I have limited understanding, but I will convey what I can. And if there's any errors, please feel free to correct me. I will lay my lay perspective, but also it's a conversation that I think that for all of us to have. So I'm going to try and make this interactive as possible. Is any questions from any of you? If you're wanting to interrupt at any point, please feel free, to do that. So the question I'm going to ask is, what is Islam? And just whatever comes to mind. What's the first thing that comes to mind when the word Islam is mentioned?
The way of life.
Way of life. Yeah.
Perfection.
Sorry.
Perfection. Perfection.
Perfection. Yes.
Identity.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? The kalima. Mm-hmm. Kalima, which is a declaration of faith, which is Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah, witness that there is one God, the messenger of God. Okay. So we can go on, but just to illustrate the point that when we hear the word Islam, there are many things that come to mind. The word Islam, it means many things. It means peace, the salam, sim, lamim, wholeness, submission, sincerity, safeness, peace. It's about submission to the Creator. It's about a relationship between ourselves and the Creator. It's about recognizing that there is a Creator, and we believe that there's one Creator, and we believe that this Creator has sent us messages through prophets, and we believe that there are 124,000 prophets, and the last prophet, as a Muslim, we believe is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also that Islam is, well, it's not a new religion. For one thing, we believe that it's an ancient religion, but also it's a state of being. It's a state of being of everything. So if we look at it, the whole universe submits to God. If we look at every cell in our body submits to God. Every galaxy, the Earth submits to God. The moon submits to God. So everything that exists, something that submits to God is Muslim. So everything in the universe everything in the universe is Muslim. And there are two beings that have been given the choice of whether or not to submit them. One is the human being, and the other one is the demonic being, which is Shaitan or the demons. And that God has sent messages to humanity through prophets. Now, as Muslims, we also believe that there are other scriptures. We believe in the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, and then there may be other scriptures as well that are not mentioned in the Quran. And when we look at things, for example, when we look at the Hindu culture, when we look at the scriptures, we find similar principles. And if we dissect all the world's faiths, and we look at the principles, we'll actually see that the principles are common amongst all of them. And some of these principles we look at, but the way in which these principles are derived and the way in which these values come, there are different ways. The one is that, let's just say, we've got a nation and there's no prophet has come to them. But people have an innate ability to differentiate between what is right and wrong. And that is the fitrah. We all have that ability, that like a mother suckles a child, that is a fitrah. To help the next person, that is an innate kind of nature that we've got. Then there's another level which has to do with reasoning or aql. So that's another way in which we kind of derive values, and then there's divine reasoning or wahy. Now, once again, I said I like to make things interactive. So I want you to think about principles from Islam and that are common between the different faiths. What principles can we think of? Yeah.
Believing in a higher being.
Belief in a higher being, yeah. Tolerance. Okay, so I mean, these are a bit of higher order things. So I've listed some of these things. Justice. Justice is a concept that transcends humanity. Fairness. Honesty. There's a principle of what we sow, we shall reap. The concept of belief in a higher being and worship. Okay. And I'm going to come back to the concept of worship. This concept of love. One of the names of the Creator is Al-Wudud. The concept of do unto others what you'd like to have done to yourself. Love thy neighbor. The concept of excellence towards our parents. And on this note, I just want to say that I'm very fortunate, alhamdulillah, both my parents are alive. Please make dua for them, please make dua that I can serve them and they can be happy with me. The concept of do no harm. It's if we go to ethics, we get into the ethics literature. This is the first kind of principle is not beneficence but non-maleficence. So the concept that before we can do good, we first must not do any harm. The concept of forgiveness. The concept of controlling the lower self. Control to achieve a higher purpose, controlling anger, lust, greed, jealousy. The concept that we are representatives of the Creator on this earth. And subhanAllah, there's a field that I've come across recently that I wasn't aware of, a field called Maqasid Sharia. which speaks about these kind of higher orders. It speaks about protection of religion, protection of life, protection of intellect, protection of lineage, protection of property. But just to come back to the act of worship. Worship is not, it's not just about, saying the kalima or going on the musalla and, making your salah, or about making the dua. Every act that we do can potentially be an act of worship. If we do it with the right intention, and if we start with the name of the Creator, every act that we do can potentially be an act of worship. So, just to summarize what my layperson understanding of Islam, and once again, you may correct me if I'm making any mistakes, but Islam is a state of submission to the will of the Creator, in what is in keeping with the divine order of nature. So, it's submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way everything else is submitting. Our own selves submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet we may sometimes not be submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not obeying the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's also about building a relationship. And remember, one khutbah speak about speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being a form of dhikr, and also being a dua. It's about fulfilling the instructions of the Creator through our innate nature of goodness, the fitrah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, using our sense of reasoning, our aql, and also following the scriptures. And there are common principles that we need to follow in order to foster this relationship, and all of this is in preparation for a continued state of existence. But we believe that life doesn't end when we close our eyes, when our soul is taken away. Life carries on. So we're preparing for that afterlife by fulfilling the commands and looking at these principles that the Creator has given us. So from here, I'm going to move on to what is primary health care. Okay. And by way of introduction, I'm going to paint a case scenario. So I want you to imagine you've got a 32-year-old patient that's in front of you, and this patient has a rare kind of genetic heart disease. And the only way this person's life can be saved is through a heart transplant. Okay. And heart transplants, we do here at our hospital at Fruiterskills, very famous. So the question I want to ask you is, how many of you believe that heart transplantation is a primary health care issue? So if you believe that heart transplantation, okay, so if you don't believe primary health care heart transplantation operation is a primary health care issue, please raise your hands.
We don't believe.
If you don't believe. Yeah, you don't believe it's a primary health care issue, okay? How many people do believe it is a primary health care issue? Okay, let's stop with that. And I take it the rest is the answer. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes?
What do you mean by primary health care issue?
Okay, that's a good question. But before we get to that, I want to ask the people that don't believe it's a primary health care issue, what is your understanding?
Of not being a primary health care. And you said it's a rare genetic disorder. So it's like also the complexities of it and the rarity of it doesn't make it viable for it to become a primary health care.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to add to that? The people that don't believe it's a primary health care issue? Do you want to add something?
So primary health care is meant to be health care that's given by the general practitioner without needing specialized care. So hypertension, diabetes management, while heart transplant should be secondary tertiary care.
Okay, thank you. The people that believe that it is a primary health care issue, what are your views?
So, heart transplant is the only
Anybody else wants to add to what was said by the brother?
Let's say that my understanding of primary health is using the resources that are available to provide the most holistic, optimal care that the patient requires, using biological factors, psychological factors, and societal factors, and bringing those things together. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Okay, so I mean, some of you may have gotten my lecture, but and you will be in my lecture again in 4th year. But if there's anything, you know, I want you to remember about what is primary health care, it's this. So if you don't remember anything else, primary health care is health for all. Okay. So it's about getting health for all. And what we've done is we've actually taken that term health for all, and we've created a mnemonic for all the different principles for primary health care. And I'm going to speak to some of those principles. Just to say that, you know, that primary health care, it's a relatively new concept. It's been here for about 100 years or so, and it was ratified 40 years ago at this conference. And this conference is in Kazakhstan, and there's quite a few things that are spoken like, and I'm going to get back to the significance of Kazakhstan. But the issue that I think that we need to kind of differentiate between is primary level care and the primary health care approach. Okay, so whereas primary level care is that kind of the first level care, and the primary health care approach speaks to a number of principles, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on these principles and how do these principles relate to Islam. So I won't have time to speak to all of them, but I'm going to speak to some of them. But let me just name these principles before I go on. And then also I've got some pamphlets over here which you are welcome to kind of pass around, that we use in our teaching as well. You can just pass backwards. So the principles include holistic, which Brother Ilya spoke about. There's equity and equality. It's a principle of access. There's a principle of listening and loving to the community. There's a principle of teamwork. There's a principle of health promotion. There's a principle of funding. There's a principle that health involves different sectors. There's a principle of rights and responsibilities, appropriate and acceptable levels of care and literature. Now, the first thing to say is when we're speaking about health for all, we have to think about health as not just being physical health, the health of the body. Health is a very holistic concept. And you know, it's something that was defined about 50 years ago by the World Health Organization, but it's something I think that Islam has been speaking about for many more years. Before that, Islam speaks about kind of different aspects of health. There is physical health, that we need to be fit. The Prophet ﷺ was extremely fit. But there's also mental health. There's the Surah Al-Duha that speaks about the time the Prophet ﷺ was actually in a time of depression, and if one is feeling depressed, it's a very good dua surah to read. There's social health, and there are many kind of parts of Islam that speaks to social well-being. There's also environmental health, and there's political health. And you know, one of the brothers mentioned it's a way of life, it's a complete way of life. Islam actually addresses all of these different kind of concepts. So when kind of they thought of holistic care at the Al-Ma'ata Declaration, it was actually a concept that was already spoken about 1400 years ago. And we have to remember that what's our role in society? What is our role as Muslims? What's our role as human beings? One of the ayat in the Quran speaks about, us being sent as the representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as his representatives, we have to look after a number of different things. We have to look after the planet. What we sow, what we shall reap. If we harm the environment, we will eventually either face harm ourselves, or there will be repercussions with our children, or their children, or other future generations. So it's our duty to look after the environment and to think of how our actions can impact on the environment, how it can impact on society. And subhanAllah, there are a number of things in Islam that if you follow the prescriptions, it can be beneficial to society. So if you follow the prescription of zakat, which is a mandatory tax which we all have to give on excess wealth, many things many problems can be alleviated. There's a concept of sadaqah. Okay? And sadaqah is more than just giving money. Anything we do can be a sadaqah. Just a smile can be a sadaqah. To say that these practices and holistic practices, if we look at other faiths, we also will find it there. And we're living in a society where Muslims are a minority, and we have to interact with different members of society, and we have to look for common terms and build bridges. There's a concept of equity and equality. Now, it's important to understand the difference between the concept of equity and equality. And some of you may have seen that picture, of where you've got three people. Unfortunately, I don't have the picture with me now. They're trying to look over the fence. One person is very tall, the other is a medium height, and the other one's pretty short. Now, if you're going to treat them equally and give each of them a crate, they will all stand up a bit higher, but the shortest person still can't see over the fence. But if you give the shortest person one more crate, and you give the tallest person who doesn't need a crate, you can see without that crate over the wall, that speaks to the concept of equity. And once again, kind of looking at the concept of zakat, it actually speaks to equity, over equality. And how is that? Well, you are taxed on 2.5% of your wealth. So if you are very rich, if you are a billionaire, 2.5% is, wow. It's a lot of money. If your earning is in the 100,000s, 2.5% is a particular amount. And if you are not able to pay zakat, you don't have to pay zakat. So what you're giving is proportionate to what you earn. And in that way, I believe that Islam speaks to equity. And subhanAllah, the concept of zakat is a universal wealth tax. And it's not just Islam that speaks about universal wealth tax. There are other faiths that also speaks about universal wealth tax. And I believe that if we were to apply universal wealth tax across the board, the world would be a very different place. Unfortunately, what happens now, though, is that the net wealth in the world is going from the poor to the rich, whereas it actually should be the other way around. And what happens is that, unfortunately, people that are richer find ways to hide, their money and find ways to avoid that wealth. But if a person had that moral integrity, they would know that the Creator is watching them, and they would know that they need to give of their wealth to the poor. The next concept I'm going to speak about is health promotion. So I lecture in health promotion. So I think I have to speak a little bit about health promotion as a concept. Just to say, first of all, it's a loaded term. Many people misunderstand the term health promotion. When you think of health promotion, think of health education. Health education is very important. You think about pamphlets, handing out pamphlets. And you know, the messages around coronavirus, it's happening as all health education. Very important. We need to know what to do when it comes to coronavirus. But there are other components of health promotion as well. And the one component I'm going to speak about is advocacy. There are other components. You're welcome to come and join me on the lecture. I'll teach you all about health promotion, inshallah. But advocacy is something that is very neglected. The question is, how do we advocate? And what do we advocate for? And when do we need to advocate? Well, if someone needs a particular investigation, a patient that comes and needs a particular investigation and is not available at your hospital, you have a duty to advocate for that patient to get an investigation at another hospital. And you might be on the phone, you might have to fight with the registrar on that side who doesn't want to take the patient for whatever reason. But that's our duty. Our duty is to advocate for the rights of our patient. But the question is, how do we advocate? And if we ask ourselves, well, to advocate means to go to a higher authority. And who is the highest authority? It's our Creator. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, I believe that the first step that we should do in any advocacy campaign is to make dua. To make a prayer and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open the doors of whatever it is that we're trying to do for anyone or for ourselves. And you know, the ideal way is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the door without me doing anything. And sometimes you'll see that things happen. You know, you see something and you can't do anything, make dua and subhanAllah, it just happens, things happen. Or with minimal effort, but there are many challenges that actually require struggles, like major struggles. And you know, when we are embarking on an advocacy effort, we also have to ask ourselves, you know, when it comes to this problem, are we part of the problem or are we part of the solution for the problem? And if we are part of the problem, the first person we need to struggle against is our own selves. Now the word struggle in Arabic, you know, is jihad, or one of the meanings is struggle, and it's a very misunderstood word. As you're struggling through your studies and you have to choose between studying your work and watching a YouTube video, that struggle that you do to overcome that is a jihad. Jihad is not about blowing ourselves up or killing ourselves and killing innocent people. It's not about oppressing people. We have a duty to advocate and struggle against ourselves. And there's a method of struggle. When we look at the Prophet and the example of the Prophet, there's so many people that was actively, you know, if I can, there's a very strong word in my mind which I don't want to use, but they were very antagonistic towards the Prophet ﷺ. And they did terrible things to the Prophet ﷺ. But what was his response? His response was one of love. And through that response of love, he won so many people over. And once again, relating it to, you know, the other prophets, the Isa alayhi you said, turn the other cheek. And the Prophet ﷺ was probably one of the best examples of a person that did that. But there are times that we need to escalate the struggle. But even then, when we do escalate, there's a methodology to doing that. We have to be respectful. And the Prophet ﷺ showed that respect in all his endeavors. Even this example of Musa alayhi salam, the Quran speaks about how Allah instructed Musa in his method of advising Fir'aun was to do it in a beautiful manner. So, struggle in an ethical manner. Which moves us, which is taking me to the next concept I want to speak about, which is rights and ethics. Now, I have spoken out about a few issues related to ethics, and there's one issue that as a lecturer that I do need to raise, and I do apologize in advance for having to raise this thing, but it's an issue of integrity. And it's something that I've noticed among students, and I'm sure that none of you sitting here are doing this. But what I've noticed is that students may sign registers on behalf of other students. And unfortunately, you know, I'm sorry to say this is dishonesty. And it's unethical. And yes, it seems like a small thing, you know, but we must remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us. And what we sow, we shall reap. And unfortunately, we've got cases of where we have Muslim practitioners that are issuing fake certificates. And you know, it starts off in this way, and you think about corruption, you think about all the corruption that's happening out there, and I think that one of the biggest kind of threats to our health is corruption. It starts off with these small things. So we have to watch ourselves continuously, we have to struggle against ourselves, you know, and we have to do what is right, even if it's going to mean that, you know, even if it means that we have to endure a little bit of difficulty going through it, it's much better. Because what happens is that, you know, we have a way of catching out. You know, it's very easy. We know who it is. And when we discover that it's a Muslim, for me, actually it's very embarrassing. You know, because we don't want to see ourselves and in that manner. And please make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can keep all of us on a path of integrity. And when we look at the role models of yesteryear, subhanAllah, it is through the impeccable integrity that they won people over, they won their love over. The last principle that I want to speak about is the concept of literature. Now, subhanAllah, historically, Muslims have been at the forefront of science and literature, the development of literature. You all are probably familiar with systematic reviews. Okay, it's a relatively recent concept that's come in, and David Sackett, that's what he was famous for, systematic reviews, popularizing systematic reviews in the last kind of 40 years or so. What if I told you that 1400 years ago, we have examples of systematic reviews happening through the compilation of the Quran? Because what happened is that the Quran, at the time of its revelation, was what it was, the reading. It was a reading, it was something that was kept in the hearts of people. It was only later on that it was written, and Ishaaq can correct me if I'm wrong, it was only later on that it was systematically written, and it was done in a systematic way, where every ayah was verified by a group of the most reliable huffaz. And the mushaf that we have today is a result of that systematic compilation of the mushaf. Similarly, the concept of the compilation of the ahadith, there's a whole kind of chain of narration. There's a systematic chain of narration. There's a systematic way in which every narrator was graded, you know, in terms of the character. That's amazing. You know, science at its forefront 1400 years ago. Yet you also see there are examples of where Muslims were kind of inventing things 1,000 years ago, and this is something I just learned about recently. A Muslim by the name of Al-Zahrawi. How many of you have heard of Al-Zahrawi? Maybe? Okay. So Al-Zahrawi was a physician that lived in Andalus in Spain. And he was a surgeon. He lived 1,000 years ago. In fact, he died in 1030. Exactly 1,000 something years ago, 1,007 years ago. And he wrote a kitab called Al-Tasrif. It was a 30-volume encyclopedia. And that encyclopedia started off with principles of general medicine. Then went on to physiology, pharmacology, obstetrics, orthopedics, and surgery. This is amazing. This guy, he is seen to be the father of surgery as such. He invented so many different instruments, a number of them we're still using today. There's a number of techniques that he described that that we still use in today's practice. You know, there's something called, and these were ascribed to other people. So there's something called the cautious method of relocated dislocated soul. I'm not familiar with that particular method. But then there's also something called a Walsh's position in obstetrics. So these are things that are part of our body of knowledge that we use today. So when we speak about decolonizing medicine, that is something we speak about. There's a rich heritage of scholarship that is not acknowledged, that is not being taught. And you know, I remember having history of medicine lectures when I was in second year. And subhanAllah, you know, I was very fortunate to have an enlightened muallim, and I asked for Allah to grant him Jannatul Firdaus. He's passed away. But he introduced us to the history of Islam and medicine. And we were able to challenge the lecturer at the time, you know, in terms of, you know, things that were said, in terms of where things were discovered. And the other thing to say is that for a Muslim, there's no separation between science and religion. For us, it's all integrated. There's dunya knowledge and there's akhirah knowledge, but all knowledge comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's very unfortunate that in the past 300 years ago, there's been a regression where people have separated out this knowledge. And yes, we need to specialize, but we also need to be knowledgeable. And the scholars of yesteryear were polymaths. And we need to continuously seek knowledge from birth to the time we die. And the challenge is, and please make dua for me as well, you know, to be able to increase our deen knowledge after we've done dunya knowledge, and so that we can be of greater benefit, inshallah. So, just a few concluding words. When looking for a framework that brings together spirituality, science, social science, and biology, for me, in my dunya knowledge, primary health care does that. And I firmly believe that if primary health care principles were to be implemented universally, the world would be a much better place. The world that we live in, unfortunately, is very sick. And I believe that primary health gives us the tools to make not only a diagnosis, but also to offer treatment. And when we combine it with our Islamic principles, subhanAllah, I think that the ability to accelerate these principles is there. I believe that our purpose as Muslims is to try to help to make this world a better place. And the principles of primary health care are, in my humble opinion, in keeping with Islamic principles, generally speaking. The lead theme of this university, and inshallah of Stellenbosch University as well soon, I think, the lead theme of this university is primary health care. And in fact, the lead theme of our national health system is primary health care. And I believe that if we apply this as the mode of our clinical practice in our careers, we will better align our practice with Islamic principles and thus improve our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. The question is, you know, we've got this approach now, it's been here for 40 years. Why is it that, you know, we're not moving? How can we take these things forward? And I think that as young Muslims, we have a particular role and responsibility, especially since this approach is so much in keeping with our spirituality, to actually take this method forward. And if you look at different forums, you know, there are different forums where it's happening. I looked at the Islamic Medical Association's panel, they are doing amazing things, and I would encourage you to get involved in that forum as well. There's a clinic happening in Langa. I would invite everybody to to be part of that clinic. Yeah, these are just some thoughts, that I thought to share with you, and I hope that you found it of some benefit. So cool. Any questions?
So we say Jazakallah khairan to Dr. Datay for sharing those wonderful words with us. Do we have any questions from the audience? I think it's important to have discussion after these events. Any burning questions?
Yes, we just wanted to get an explanation on how you think about primary health care. Is there a difference between primary care and primary health care?
Okay. So it's a very important question, a very important difference to understand. So there's primary level care, which is what GPs do. They work at that cold face, and community health workers are also doing primary level care. But primary health care approach involves all of these principles, and I think that probably we got the name wrong that time. We should have called it maybe something else. I believe it should be called the Health for All approach. That's my belief. We should all call it that name. But it's understanding that it's about the principles and not the levels of care. Okay, and that's an important point that you raised, because what happened was that after the Alma-Ata Declaration, and one of the reasons why this kind of approach hasn't kind of gone out is something called selective primary health care was born. Like the year after the Alma-Ata Declaration, there was a conference held, small conference by the Rockefeller Foundation in 1979, and they spoke about specific things. They said the primary health care approach, health for all, is something that's unachievable. We need to focus on certain things. So they spoke about GOBI, FFF, which has to do with growth and breastfeeding and formula and those kind of things, immunization. But primary health care is much broader than that, and I think that is part of the reason why the name itself, I think, is a challenge. But there are other kind of policies that have come afterwards that haven't really helped the cause.
Okay, so in your opinion, is it something that's achievable? And if so, what would be the rather obvious way to do that? Or what is the approach that, is this the guys that are advocating for primary health care? So what is their vision sort of entail for making this a possibility?
Okay, so I think that the first thing is to have people on the same page, to have people understand what does primary health care mean. So if we as young practitioners going out there into the community have this idea of holistic care, primary health care applies to you no matter what you do. If you decide not to do medicine, for example, and decide to become an economist, just an example, an extreme example, or you decide to become a cardiac surgeon, or any other kind of profession that you wish to apply, to know that these principles apply wherever we are. That would be the very first step. There's something called upstream determinants of health. You may have heard of that. Where a lot of the problems that we see actually starts way before the person comes to see us. So whether the level of education that the person achieved, the type of work the person is doing, the type of community the person came from.
Information of the patient.
Of the patient. All of that will determine what type of health outcome that person is going to have. So if you're wanting to make a difference, we actually have to try to change things at that level. So a couple of projects that I'm involved with, and you're welcome to come on board, is we go out into different impoverished communities and we look at what are the challenges in that community. And by addressing those challenges, whether it's education or drugs or other things, we can indirectly impact on health downstream. So there's something, I think that it's something called social accountability. I think that each of us should have a social accountability profile. So if we were to spend 1 hour per week doing good, well, let's call it a Mandela hour, let's contextualize in Africa, Mandela hour. We had a Mandela hour, 1 hour a week, where we go out and we devote the next 10 to 15 years on a project or on a cause. You know, you decide whatever it was, whether it's diabetes in the Muslim community, which is another project, you know, I could take on board with, or whether it's whether it's gangsterism or drugs, whatever it is, you decide I'm going to commit the next 10, 15 years to that thing. And you just spend 1 hour a week on that thing. Just imagine what kind of impact can that potentially have.
Listen, Doc, I have to leave now, but I want to get the details from someone. Who can I ask? Ilyas. Is that your name?
Ilyas.
Yeah. Ilyas, sorry, Ilyas.
Okay, Jazakallah, what's your name, brother?
Fahim.
Fahim.
I have to run now, but I really want to engage this conversation.
Inshallah.
On another day, maybe. I'll message you.
Jazakallah, appreciate that. Are there any other questions? Okay.
I actually have a question. Just back to that whole concept of how medicine and health sciences is an incredibly busy environment. You know how the hospitals are, you're busy all the time, you're helping patients, and alhamdulillah, you're doing good work, but it's always something that I've struggled with is how do you maintain that sense of God consciousness within the confinements of the busyness that it's like, I found things like just saying Allah's name helps, but in your experience as a health practitioner, what sort of things have you found that for us can we do to help strengthen our environment consciousness within the confinements of the busy environment, which is inevitable for us to experience?
It's a very good question. So you're going to find stress is a big challenge, huge challenge. And in fact, you are probably experiencing right now. Probably thinking you're grateful that the exams are done today, you know, but 8 weeks from now, you might be facing a similar situation. And how does one deal with that? And it doesn't stop, I can tell you this. Obviously, it doesn't stop, it only gets more. So one thing that I came across, and subhanAllah, it's a concept that I've come across, that I've known about from an Islamic perspective, but I've come across in other perspectives, and it's a concept of mindfulness. And mindfulness is about being in the moment. Now, the question, and I asked, and I applied to my salah. How often do I make salah, and as I'm making salah, there's 1,001 thoughts that are going through my mind. And am I entertaining the salah, or am I entertaining those thoughts? So, the concept of khushu. So, that concept of mindfulness, being in the moment. So, when we make salah, so the one way of relieving stress is to adhere to this. I mean, there will always be, the one thing that one can try to stick to in that busy day is to stick to your salah. No matter how busy it is, you can find a space somewhere in a corner and make your salah, even if it's just your fara'id. Right? That's the one thing. I mean, that's the one thing I find that if I don't do it, I'm actually I find that I'm more anxious than if I make my salah. I feel at peace. But when we make our salah, to use it as a period to actually be mindful. I mean, we use that concept of khushu, and inshallah Allah subhanahu will reward us for that, for being in a state of khushu, but it also has physiologic effects. And the physiologic effect that it has is that it decreases the level of cortisol in the body, decreases it decreases the adrenaline that's going through, it decreases the cortisol, it decreases the brain activity. They've done actually studies on MRI, functional MRIs on people when they're making salah, and what they find is that there are different types of waves, and you know more than me about this, but there's a particular type of wave that is associated with relaxation. I think it's the alpha wave. And they find that when people are performing salah, their brain goes into an alpha wave state. So just being mindful in the moment, you know, and making dua all the time, because you don't know what is the next right move to do. You know, speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speak to Allah constantly as you're going through your day, through your busy day. You know, these are ways in which we can alleviate the stress and have a better idea of what to do next.
And are there any other questions? I've one more. Our last question is just, you mentioned how there are different aspects of providing healthcare, in the sense that being healthy is not necessarily physical on its own, in the sense that you can have emotional health, you can have mental health, you can have spiritual health. And it seems to me that in this environment, this allopathic environment, that we are so focused on the physical health that we neglect the spiritual health. And to what extent, in your opinion, should health practitioners identify not just physical diseases, but spiritual diseases in the people that we engage with?
Once again, a very good question. First of all, I'll just say that we are, alhamdulillah, this faculty moving towards kind of more holistic care. So you've got palliative care teaching, and in the palliative care teaching, you'll find they speak about spirituality. So it is something that is recognized, actually. That's the first thing to say. I think when it comes to spiritual ailments, the first patient we need to look at is ourselves. Ultimately, each of us may have certain spiritual diseases, and these spiritual diseases, if not addressed, does manifest as a physical disease or as a mental disease or as a social disease. You can draw linkages very easily. So if greed is my spiritual illness, it's going to manifest itself as inequity in society. You understand? If gluttony is my disease, it's going to manifest as diabetes. Unfortunately, I'm being very blunt. Diabetes is a disease of overeating. It's just simply diabetes type 2 is a disease of overeating. And I'm sorry to have to say that, but we have to get in. It's about the amount of carbons that you put in that gets accumulated on our body. So if we monitor that, and Prophet ﷺ, you know, once again with the prophetic model of how he ate, you know, if we adhere to that, inshallah, we can achieve many things. So these things, these spiritual ailments, if we can address that, it will result in physical benefits as well, inshallah.
So, Robin?
I just have one question. Dr. mentioned about Tibu Nabawi in the prophetic medicine. How do you actually implement that in your practice, or do you not? Because we know the allopathic approach that everything has to be evidence-based. So do you actually try to implement it, or do you rather keep it to a patient that is more inclined towards that approach, or how do you go about it?
Okay. Can you maybe just explain to the audience what is Tibu Nabawi? What is Tibu Nabawi to the audience?
Tibu Nabawi is the prophetic medicine, so the hadith of how to cure yourself according to the Quran and Sunnah.
Jazakallah for that question. So I think the first thing to say is that as Muslim practitioners, we are trained in allopathic medicine, but no matter what we do, we can only do through the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, I often say to myself, well, if I can see something, or diagnose something, or treat something, is only through the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I miss something, I mean, I blame myself for maybe not having been thorough enough. But sometimes you can be the most careful driver, and still if a child runs across the road and you're driving, that child is gone. You know. So I mean, as long as one has tried your best, because at the end of the day, we'll answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's dua and dawa. And whenever we see a patient, we make dua for that patient, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant that patient shifa. We start with Bismillah when we see that patient. You know, that in itself makes that act an ibadah. Now, there are different aspects, and I think that even within allopathic medicine, there are many things we don't understand. There are many things about the universe that we don't understand. And shifa, ultimately, I believe, comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There have been cases of where people have had kind of diseases that are considered to be terminal, and they have been cured from that without any intervention from an allopathic practitioner. How do we explain that? We don't know how we can explain that. There may be explanation, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So there may be shifa'a in different forms, you know, and sometimes even drinking a glass of water can be shifa'a, if it has been recited upon. So I think that as allopathic practitioners, we need to be humble to say that, you know, we don't know everything. If a patient wishes to go to a traditional practitioner, and Decolonising is an example of a traditional practitioner, that is their right to do that. There are certain conditions where we know that we need allopathic medicine, and I'm sure that practitioners would also admit that there are certain things that, you know, if there's a lump that needs to be taken out, and we look at the example of the Al-Zahrawi, he was actually an allopathic practitioner, in fact a father of allopathic practice from that perspective. But if there's a lump that needs to be taken out, it needs to be taken out. So I think the approach is about humility. And the approach is about respecting patients' autonomy. And I think that the evidence is something that is good to generate. And I think that we are in the early stages of evidence generation. But even there may be sometimes there's the evidence, and how do you interpret the evidence? And any allopathic practitioner will tell you, okay, there's a randomized control trial that showed that this is beneficial over that, but when you apply it to this patient, it doesn't work. So there's always, you know, even as in Sharia, there's the rules and there's the exceptions to the rules. So that would be my approach.
Any other questions? Yes.
So the talk is spoken about how primary healthcare or our practice links to Islam. I want to know, what do you do in the case where it doesn't necessarily link with our beliefs? So one example that I can think of, the only example I can think of, I'm sure there are more, but I don't know, is in the case of abortion. We have prescribed misoprostol, the patient who comes to us and wants in the abortion for no other reason other than they want abortion. So how do we deal with it other than, so if we're in a rural setting, there's no other place you can refer that patient to. They come to you, you are the doctor, and they want an abortion. So either you give it to them or they get it back to you. So how do you deal with that as Muslims if it's not something that we
That's a very good question. I'm going to ask the Sheikh if you have any thoughts before I render my thoughts.
There's a qaida, there's a principle, Islamic legal maxim that says أخف الضررين. So you take the lesser of two evils. So you have to understand the situation. If you know this person, if you have to first interview the person and, you know, speak to the person, if you know the patient will thereafter cause more harm to them, then you have to know way it out. If the harm will cause the patient to, you know, to be afflicted with greater harm that might kill the patient herself, then you will say rather go for the abortion. Because you are now looking at two things, either saving a life, the patient's life, by going to do an abortion, backdoor abortion, or maybe, you know, street abortion, and it may cause greater harm, or you do the abortion yourself. But if you only have the two instances, two cases, then you take the lesser of two evil. Because you know the patient will do it. Because if you're in a community, you know the patients there, you know what they're prone to do, and if this is something that happens regularly in the clinic, every single day this happens, and you see what happens if they don't go to do the abortion in the clinic and they go outside the back door, and this is what's the outcomes. Then of course you will have enough evidence to say that this is now the less of two evil. We rather do this to save the lives of others. So this is a principle what many of the scholars use when it comes to a situation we both are evil, we rather take the lesser of the two evils.
Circle. I think that's best answered. And there are going to be grey areas, and we ask Allah subhanahu to guide us to make the best decision, and we have to make istighfar as well for on many things. Make istighfar after we've made salah. Our mind is wandering many other things. I think Sheikh has answered